What's going on, guys? It's Ben, and today we're going to do an album review of Xxxtentacion's second studio album, the first since his debut album 17. We will be looking at an overview, key takeaways, the flow of both X and the album itself, his lyricism, production, features, some of the highlights and some of the lowlights, the concept of the album, the enjoyment factor, and finally a conclusion. Let's get into it. Firstly, we have an overview of the album. It's important to remember that this is an aesthetic album, more about the way that it sounds than what the lyrics actually mean. X said himself on an Instagram story, and I quote, "This album's not about the words, it's about the feeling. It'll be very hard to understand, but very easy to listen to. It's not what you're expecting, even if you feel like you understand my music. Be prepared to not understand this music." Question Mark has 18 tracks, but they are short. It turns into a condensed and short listen, something that I've always enjoyed about X's music. One of the biggest drawbacks of Question Mark is that it's so similar to 17, it could have been titled 18. This album was enjoyable to listen to, but it had its drawbacks, and those will be detailed shortly. Next, we have the key takeaways from Question Mark. The first of these is that X is sad, the second is that this pain never goes away, and the third theme is sex, and finally, the fourth theme seems to be that he's not going to rap a lot anymore, and he's turned into an alternative style artist. Now we're going to look at the flow on Question Mark. Both X's flow and the flow of the album itself are good on Question Mark. Each song drifts well into the next, and all of the transitions are well done. X himself comes with fast, hard-hitting flows from time to time, but it's mostly singing, something that we saw a lot on 17, but just like 17, it works. So for flow, we're going to give it a SkeenScore of 7 out of 10. Next, we have lyricism. X's lyricism has never been the most commendable, and it shows here. There isn't a lot of wordplay or any sort of entendres to speak of, but the lyrics themselves aren't completely meaningless. They're just lackluster and don't have any sort of wow factor to them. It should be noted that X himself said the album wouldn't be the most lyrical, but it's meant more for the sound, which did shine. So, lyricism, we're going to give it a SkeenScore of 5 out of 10. Next up is production. Guitar-heavy instrumentals power Question Mark for the most part, in likeness to 17, and they work really well with X's singing smooth vocals. The beat selection on this album fit the aesthetic perfectly, and there isn't a single track that I could complain about. So we're going to give this a SkeenScore of a perfect 10 out of 10. Next up is features. Question Mark is not a feature-heavy album, however the features did play a role. Joey Badass came with bars for his feature on Infinity 888, with more wordplay in his one verse than the rest of Question Mark combined. This is easily the highlight feature of the entire album. The next feature was Matt Ox, a 13-year-old rapper. He sucks. I can respect X's attempt to put a young rapper on, but Matt Ox should collab with Matty B Raps, not Xxxtentacion. This was a sad feature and by far the worst on the album. Then there was P&B Rock, who had a feature on Smash and Changes. And while his Changes verse was just one line being repeated 6 times, his feature on Smash was better, and P&B Rock's auto-tune heavy sound fit well with X and the aesthetic of the album. The final feature was Travis Barker, who is the drummer from Blink-182, and he featured on Pain Equals Best Friend for when the song turned into Screamo. And I suppose that his feature was okay, it was just that X failed that part of the song. So for a SkeenScore, we're going to give it a 6 out of 10. All thanks to Matt Ox. Now we'll look at 5 highlights from the album. I'll speak about these in order from my most favorite to my least favorite, but bear in mind that all of these are great tracks. My favorite song on the entire album is Numb, a track that could have been taken right out of 17, but the rock style record is fantastic and it carries the message of X's pain and its inescapability. My second favorite is Moonlight. It has a funky, synth-based instrumental, and with X's smooth vocals, it delivers a pretty basic song, but it works really well. My third favorite was Infinity, also titled 888. It starts with a respectable verse from Joey Badass, and X's verse had one of the best flows on the album. It was also commendable in its own right. My fourth favorite was Sad, which was a single preluding the album. Just like Moonlight, it sounds great. It isn't the most lyrical, but the instrumental is percussion heavy and it works really well. And finally, my fifth favorite was The Remedy for a Broken Heart, secondarily titled Why Am I So in Love? This could have been on 17, and it's likely about his ex-girlfriend Geneva Ayala, and it's a meaningful song about his love for her. Now we'll look at some of the lowlights, or in my opinion, the worst songs on the album. I'll start with the fifth worst and work towards what is, in my opinion, the worst song on the entire album. So, starting at the fifth worst, we have Pain Equals Best Friend. It's a screamo type record that starts just fine. It sounds great. It's just X singing over a guitar-based instrumental, and then Travis Barker's drum feature comes in, and X starts screaming, and the entire song is basically ruined. The fourth worst song is Going Down. It has an annoying chorus that just repeats itself for a while, and the verse is just as annoying with X's constant voice switches with weird nasally singing. It's just a forgettable track and isn't very good. The third worst is the $3 song. It features 13-year-old Matt Ox. End of story. The second worst is Schizophrenia. It's another screamo type track. It just feels out of place. I suppose some people could enjoy the aesthetic of this song, but I wasn't one of those people. I really dislike this, but it wasn't as bad as Floor 555. It finds X turning to a screamo side, and some people might enjoy it, and it might fit the alternative theme of the album, but it just sounds wrong in its placement of the album. It's not a good track and by far the worst. And now we'll take a look at the concept of the album. The concept of Question Mark is to be an alternative album, one that's mind-opening, as we hear from the introduction track. It's also meant to make you feel the music rather than hear it, and I would be lying if I said that this concept didn't work. You can just kind of drift away, not really listen to what he's saying, but just like feel it. So we're going to give this a SkeenScore of a 9 out of 10. However, this will be exempt from the final score as this isn't a conceptual album. And finally, before the conclusion, we have the enjoyment factor. While there are a lot of lowlights, there's something about this album that just works. It sounds really good even though none of them really stand out that much. The enjoyment factor is one of the best points of the album. I loved it. I will definitely be returning to this album, save for a few of those songs. And now to wrap everything up, we have the conclusion. What X is good at, he does well, but when he turns experimental, his music loses some of its shine. Overall, it was an enjoyable album that I will return to and will recommend others to listen to, but I will either skip or delete some of the lowlights on the album. The biggest drawback is that it could be called the second half of 17. We don't want to see X make the same music over and over, or his career will become forgettable at best. I hope in the future some of X's albums have different types of music, maybe with a little bit more rapping rather than this emotional, sad, almost depressing music. After averaging out the SkeenScore for flow, lyricism, production, and features, we end up with a score of 7 out of 10.